You're listening to the T21 Podcast, brought to you by Down Syndrome Group of the Ozarks. Our mission is to bring life and wellness to families who are advocating towards a community of inclusion for individuals with Down syndrome. Hello and welcome to the T21 Podcast. My name is Chloe Jones and joining with me is Amy Bullard.
Hi guys.
Here on the T21 Podcast, we explore topics that are relevant to the Down syndrome community in 21 minutes or less. And today we're going to be talking about accommodations and modifications in the Red Ed classroom with our special guest, who I will introduce in just one moment. But first, I just wanted to invite you to subscribe to this podcast and like this video. And if one of these topics resonates with you, please share it with one of your friends or your family. We want to get this information out to as many people as possible, and you can help us do that. And so, on to today's topic, accommodations and modifications in the Red Ed classroom. Thank you for being on. This is Amber Peck. Hi. Amber, would you like to just introduce yourself a little bit? Tell about what you do.
Yes, I'm a special educator in Republic, and I have done this for 18 years, and I have worked with a wide variety of disabilities, elementary through high school, and so I've got experience across the board.
That's awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you for being on today.
Yeah.
I'm excited for our audience just to hear about what you have to say and hear your perspective as an educator.
Yeah.
A goal of this podcast was for it to be for educators and teach about things that are going on with education, and it's turned into all about Down syndrome. So we still find your perspective so important, and we're excited to have you on. But for our listeners that are not familiar with what accommodations and modifications are in the classroom, could you give like a brief explanation on what they are and then also why they are important?
So the difference between an accommodation and a modification is an accommodation just allows the student to access that regular education curriculum and in that environment. So we're able to make them have some success while they're with their regular education peers. Whereas a modification is going to take that curriculum and change it in some capacity. And it's going to change what the expectation is of the student. So the rigor will change in some capacity so that they can see success while working along with their peers. But it may just be their success just may look a little bit different than their peers.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Success nonetheless.
Yes, absolutely.
And then as an educator, how do you go about choosing appropriate accommodations for each student?
So when I initially get a student, we've usually done an evaluation. So every student has had an evaluation to qualify for those special education supports. And so we look at that evaluation and see what eligibility category they qualified under. And so then that evaluation and that eligibility category kind of drive it from there. And so we take where they had successes and where they had weaknesses, and we just try to bridge that gap so that we can, hopefully one day, they don't need us. But if they do need us for the rest of their educational career, then we can continue to bridge that gap and allow them to have that success in their regular education classroom. So in the 18 years that I've done education up to this point, I have built this repertoire of accommodations, and even still today, like when I was writing an IEP, I'm like, I got to get creative, and so that I can help this Reg Ed teacher and this student and this family see what success looks like. And so while I've done it 18 years, it still changes and evolves all the time. And so we work with the classroom teachers that are sitting there at the IEP meetings. We work with the parents or guardians and the whole team, and we put our heads together to figure out how we can make these kids successful in every environment that they are in the school, because they access those across every environment that they are in the school.
And sometimes veteran Reg Ed teachers will, in a meeting, say like, hey, I've noticed in my classroom that this specific thing, maybe it's fill in the blank notes, is very helpful because they're able to follow along and listen better if they're not having to go up and down 100 times, right? And so it's something that maybe the SPED teacher hasn't thought of, but the reg ed teacher says, hey, this is really helpful, and I think across the board it would be helpful, right? And so sometimes they have really good ideas, and we don't always have the answers.
Yeah, and I just sat in a meeting the other day, a few weeks ago, I guess. It's been more than a few days, but with a reg ed teacher that just knew that kid and the ins and outs and the way that their classroom worked, and I'm not in there all the time, and so she was able to speak to, like, this happens and then I see this, so how can we bridge the gap to make that disappear so that they are more successful in that moment, because this is where the breakdown is happening, and I don't get to see every little snapshot of their day, and so they're able to help us break that down and help us problem solve with that solution.
I like that. I've heard some opinions about reg ed teachers and how they just feel like they're really fighting for their child, the parent fighting for their child to just be seen by their teacher, and they feel like the SPED teacher knows them way better. So it's cool may not be the right word, but hearing your perspective of, like, the reg ed teacher sees them and knows them well, and this is how we can work together in that. Yep. I think that is a really...
And I think what, too, we see a lot is veteran teachers, whether they're SPED or reg ed, they know, right? They've done it. They know it. They know what it feels like. I think sometimes we have new special ed teachers, but we also have new reg ed teachers that have to be guided through, how do I do this? Because I've been handed this. I was taught to do this in school. And so what do I do whenever this kid can't follow this, right? So how do I accommodate so they can be successful in my classroom, and they're overwhelmed, and so you're trying to provide them information to help with that, and it's it can be tricky. It can be a tricky dynamic for sure.
Yeah, and what I always tell my new teachers, whether they're SPED or reg ed, is just build a relationship with this kid, like the kids that walk in your door, and get to know them and figure out what works for them and what their likes and their dislikes, and that will take them a long ways. And once you build that relationship with the student, then that kind of bridges the gap with the parent too, because the parent feels bought in that all these teachers are vested into my kid, and so then we can build so much more on that piece.
Yeah.
And so that relationship is key.
Before this podcast, I'm just the learner in this. This is all, I'm not an educator, never went to school for that, but you definitely are. So I told Amy, I was like, Amy, I'm asking the questions and you're going to give lots of input, because I don't know this world. And before this, I was asking Amy, I'm like, how do the SPED teachers, like, are they allowed to help the reg ed teachers with the IEPs? Like, do they have grounds for that? So one of the questions is, how do you guide regular education teachers to use those accommodations that are a part of the student's IEP? Because this was news to me.
Absolutely. And really, like, our regular educators often get A class on exceptional children, and they don't get a lot of guidance in their training. And so they get to us and they're like, just help me, please. Just help. And so I always assume that their intent with the kid is positive, and, like, they just are asking for help. And I remind them, like, a lot of times at the beginning of the year when I'm working with these newer teachers and to the building, like, they don't know the kids, and I'm like, we created this last year. These documents are a year long, and so we created this last year, and while these worked last year and this is our starting ground, we're going to build on this as we go, because accommodations evolve from year to year, even throughout the year, and it's what's set in stone today is not necessarily set in stone in 60 days. The kid evolves, and we may need to tweak it, and we all do that as an IEP team. And so I create lots of examples and provide lots of supports in the classroom for them. So I will push in and help see it, let them see it, what it looks like in the moment. I will provide those. I will sit down outside of contract time, and we'll sit down, and if we need to adapt some of the work or work on the teacher provided notes where they're needing to provide that, we will work ahead of time to get that going, and they start seeing what it looks like and how we go about doing it, and so then they feel more confident in being able to do that.
And sometimes those accommodations, like teacher provided notes, sometimes they recognize, like, oh, this could actually help my entire class, and it would be easier for me to create one accommodation for everyone and push it in, right? Because I'm seeing that it's helping this kiddo, so let's try it for everyone, and it's actually less prep work. And I think that's what a lot of teachers hear when they hear reg ed teachers, when they hear accommodations and modifications, they think extra work, but it's not always extra work.
Can you give an example of that?
Like the notes, sometimes, so tests, some of our students have, just multiple choice. Some of them have, maybe less choices on a multiple choice test. Some have teacher read tests. And so when you're having kids with different accommodations, right, then you have to prep that many different tests. So that becomes, in their mind, stressful. Whereas oftentimes, if they would talk to the SPED teacher ahead of time, they would help them. And so what we're saying is reg ed teachers are awesome, and they have a classroom of 28 kids sometimes, 24, 25 for sure. And we get that. And so lean on the support that you have in your building as a SPED teacher to help you provide these accommodations for sure.
And I feel like in our building, like our SPED team is really like the whole building's team. So while I'm the one that works with the student, other teachers are like, how can I help? Or I might go pick their brain, or hey, can you go observe this kid? They don't know you, but they know me. And so they're going to act different when I'm in the room. So somebody they don't know will come in and observe and give that feedback back to me, and like, this is what it looks like. This is how I think we could change it. Or like, now that I know what it looks like, hey, now I know how we can proceed. Because my kids look different, perform differently once they see my face.
That's all kids.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
But they want to be successful, and they take a lot of ownership over like, this is what we need to do, or hey, we need to change it this way. Like they really do take ownership in it when they feel bought in. So.
Right. And the IEP is a legally binding document, and so once it is, like, we've had the meeting, it's go, right? It's live. And so it is the job, the role of all the teachers that student teaches that student has, that's what I'm trying to say, geez, word mess up, to follow it. And so if they don't follow it, then parents have a right to come in and say, hey, like, this isn't okay. This is what we agreed as a team to do, and it has to be put in play. And so what are you doing in your classroom to make this a thing? And if you can't show me what you're doing, then parents have a right to go up the chain.
And if it's not being followed, then I say call an IEP meeting. You don't have to wait a year. Like, we can have an IEP meeting every other day if we need to. It's a lot of work, but we can have an IEP meeting every other day if we need to figure out what we're going to do to make this kiddo successful. I have a student, my own child has an IEP, and like I advocate hard for her as I do for my own students. And so what I do is I think, this is my child, every one of them in front of me. How do I want my child treated? And that's how I expect everyone to treat my own child. And so
and you want them to be successful in their least restrictive environment. And so whatever that looks like, you've got to push hard for that to be a factor. And accommodations and modifications are how that becomes a success. And so, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm learning. Are you guys learning? Well, you kind of answered this, but I also want you to kind of go in depth more of like, what is the educator's role in the accommodation specifically, and the conversation in the IEP meeting? So
like the reg ed?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
So we always have the reg ed teacher at the IEP meeting. Like they have to be there. It's not a choice, whether it's their classroom teacher. For some of our kids with more restrictive placement, sometimes that's a specials teacher that sees them and knows them a little bit differently. One of their regular educators has to be there. And they are part of that development of those accommodations. And so when we get to that document, I'm like, guys, this is where a draft is a starting spot. And I always come with a draft of recommended, like, hey, I'd like to have these conversations. But at the end of the day, the parent knows what works at home. The reg ed teacher knows what's working and what's not working in their classroom, and we just have those conversations based on their eligibility. It all has to tie back to how they qualified, but how can we bridge the gap, and where is the holes that we need to fill so they can be successful everywhere in the building? So they are there to help have those conversations. They have to be there for the entire meeting, so they're there for that entire document. And so we adjust some of those on that draft as we go. We're like, maybe we need to look at it this way, and we just have those conversations.
And like, last year, so my son and daughter also have an IEP, but Kyler was getting ready to transition into 6th grade. And so what she did was think forward of like, what accommodations are we using now that will be helpful, right, for 6th grade. So, in 6th grade, you start transitioning classrooms, you start doing all this. So he might require a little bit more support in the beginning. And so we went ahead and put those things in. So you're always kind of forward thinking, like, what if, right? But you can scale back on those too.
Yeah, we're always thinking in the next year, what are we going to encounter? So almost every one of our IEPs goes from one school year to the next. So we always are thinking, how can we make them successful over the next calendar year? It's not a school year, like just till the end of this year. It's literally for the next 365 days.
Right.
So
I know that you have people in your building that are amazing at working with you and with our students that have IEPs. And so what do those classrooms look like, and how do they implement these with fidelity and grace, really?
Well, I think the first place that the most success we see in the classrooms are the ones that are the most structured. Like the kids know what is going to happen every moment of every day, give or take a little bit. Like they are super, super structured, and they have strong relationships with their kids. Like they can talk about their kids inside out, school, at home likes, their dislikes, how they interact with their peers. Like they know these kids inside and out, and they take the time because it's a lot of work. And so they invest in those kids, and they invest in everybody. But they take that time, and they will have conversations with me before the school year starts when they're transitioning at the beginning, and be like, what do I need to know so these kids can be successful? I know this, this, and this, but I know there's more. And so they start asking questions and start digging. They take the time to listen to their kids, because our kids also can advocate really well for themselves. The ones I currently work with, and they know what their likes and dislikes are, and they'll tell you that I don't like it when people do this, but I like it when it's presented this way. And so we talk about that. They find the positives in our kid, because some of our kids have some really challenging behaviors, and they are exhausting sometimes. And so they always will hone in on those positives, and they will take the time to reach out to parents, and they won't leave that on me. And like, hey, that today we had this breakthrough, or today we saw this amazing thing happen. And it comes from them. So that's power from the parents. Like the parents know they'll hear from me, but when they hear from a reg ed teacher, like there's so much power in that.
And the kid feels that, right?
Yeah.
So like, I'm in my classroom with all of my peers, and I was chosen today for something positive instead of everyone else. And so then they'll start working for that, right? They want that positive. Yeah, they want that, but they're not used to getting that all the time whenever they're having hard behaviors, right? They're used to the negative. And oftentimes, the more times that happens, the better that it all flows, right? Because then we're going to start having those win after win after win, and then we're going to be like, oh, I don't need to be like this anymore.
And we celebrate with everybody. So like in my building, like we don't just celebrate between us and the reg ed teacher. Like we may go back to last year's or previous year's teachers and be like, hey, look what I did. Or we'll celebrate with administration or counselors. And then they take pictures and do their celebration. It ends up on social media, and they're super proud of when that ends up on social media.
And at assemblies sometimes, right? They're chosen, and that's huge, right? Like I get to be in front of the whole school and show how good I was. That's huge, right? So those are all.
I would have liked that as a kid.
Right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I would say another thing that like our kids just don't do well with chaos. Like, and they don't love the way it makes them feel. They might enjoy the chaos in the moment, but the negativity that comes from it is not always good. And so our teachers know that our kids, and most kids really, do better with the least amount of chaos. And so I think when our teachers understand that too, like we can have fun, but we've got to make sure it's in a structured way. So
yeah. Well, that is all my questions, but I did want to ask, in like 30 seconds, could you give one like leaving thought to people that are listening about accommodations and modifications?
I think educators, like, don't be afraid to ask questions to the people around you and your special educator or your principal or whoever you need to ask. And don't be afraid to advocate for what you think your kiddo needs. Don't be afraid. And then on the flip side, I think parents, like, advocate for your kids, because at the end of the day, you're their biggest cheerleader. You know them the best. You've lived with them as long as you have, and you know where they're going to be successful and when they're not. And don't be afraid to tell us and advocate for that. And if you get told no, it's okay to keep pushing. So you know your kiddo. Keep pushing.
That's so good. Thank you,
wonderful.
Amber.
Best.
Thank you so much for your insight. I know a lot of our families that are listening that have littles with Down syndrome, like, it is so good to hear an educator's perspective on what they see day in and day out, and hear also that you see their children.
I do.
And a lot of the teachers know them in and out. That's more than I think any parent could ask for whenever their child is in school.
Yeah,
So,
they're loved by lots.
They are.
love it. Well, thank you. Thank you so
thanks
much
for
for being
coming.
on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And then thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to have some links too about IEPs and modifications and accommodations in the description below. So make sure to check it out, and we'll see you guys next month.
See you guys.
If you would like to learn more about Upside Down Mercantile, you can go to shopupsidedown.com or visit us on Commercial Street in Springfield, Missouri. If you have a topic you'd like to know more about, you can email them to info@dsgo.life.